The child's handprint was still visible on the data slate when it arrived at my desk. Small fingers, smudged with what I assumed was ink, pressed against the corner of Form 8847 Tertius, the standardized planetary compliance certification for Viridia Secundus. Population 473 million. Status reclaimed. Imperial victory declared. I remember thinking someone's son or daughter had been careless in the records hall, leaving their mark on official documentation. I logged it, filed it, moved to the next certification. 3 days later, I learned there were no children left on Viridia Secundus. There had never been time for carelessness. That handprint was something else entirely. My name is Theron Calvaris. I served as Senior Compliance Evaluator, 3rd Class, Subsector Administratum for the Segmentum Obscurus for 16 years. This is how I learned that Imperial victory is not what the propaganda murals depict, and why I am writing this testimony from a place where my words can no longer reach the living. The Administratum station orbiting Cypra Mundi operated with the precision of a well-maintained chronometer. I arrived each day at the beginning of the 3rd shift, passed through the security checkpoint, where Arbitrator Malins would nod without speaking, and proceeded down Corridor 73 to Archives, Processing, Wing Secundus. The temperature was maintained at precisely 15 degrees Celsius to preserve the parchment and data crystals. Cold enough that my breath misted slightly when I first entered. Cold enough that I kept a thermal shawl draped across my shoulders while I worked. The air carried the scent of machine oil, old paper, and the faint ozone smell of cogitator banks running constantly in the adjacent chamber. I found it comforting. Order, system, purpose. My workstation faced a viewport that showed nothing but stars and the distant curve of Cypra Mundi's northern continent. The planet below was a functioning hive world, unremarkable in every administrative sense. Tithes paid on schedule. Deviation from imperial creed negligible. Heretic activity within acceptable parameters. I processed reports from 73 worlds across the subsector, verifying that reconquered territories were transitioning properly back into imperial administration. Each morning, I would light the small devotional candle at the corner of my desk, a brass aquila watching over my workspace, and recite the litany of diligent service. In accounting I serve. In verification I honor. In records I preserve his truth. The words felt meaningful. I believed the Emperor's gaze extended even to humble record keepers. That our work upheld the vast machinery of his Imperium. The reports arrived in standardized formats. Form 8847 Tertius for planetary compliance certification. Form 9012 Alpha for resource assessment post-reclamation. Form 6634 Gamma for population census and tithe projection. I had processed thousands of these documents. I knew every field, every required signature, every proper authorization code. My supervisor, Prefect Hollis, had once commended me during a quarterly review, stating that my error detection rate was 0.03%, well below the sector average. I kept that commendation data slate in my quarters. I was good at my work. I was proud of my work. I believed it mattered. Viridia Secundus had been reclaimed after a 14-month campaign against what the military annexes described as organized heretical resistance. Chaos-aligned, threat-level tertiary. The world was agriculturally rich, producing grain that fed 17 neighboring systems. Its loss to heresy had been a significant supply chain disruption. Its reclamation was therefore celebrated as a strategic and spiritual victory. I had processed the initial conquest reports 6 months prior. The Astra Militarum commander had been commended. The planetary governor had been executed for failure to prevent heresy's spread. A new governor had been appointed from the administratum ranks. Everything proceeded according to established protocol. The compliance certification that arrived on the 4th day of month 7, year 147 of the 41st millennium, appeared entirely ordinary. Green wax seal intact. Authorization signatures present. All required fields completed. I scanned it first with my eyes, then fed it into the verification cogitator, waiting for the machine to confirm what I already suspected. Another successful integration into the Emperor's domain. The cogitator processed for 37 seconds, longer than usual, then returned its assessment. Status verified. Compliant. Approved for archival. I should have archived it immediately. Instead, I noticed the handprint, small, too small, pressed into the bottom right corner of the parchment, where the certification seal had been applied. The ink was not standard administratum black, but something rust-colored, slightly smudged. A child's handprint. I remember smiling slightly, assuming some clerk's offspring had been present during document preparation. It was a minor irregularity, not worth formal notation, but curious enough that I made a marginal note in my personal log. Minor contamination, non-critical, aesthetic only. I filed the document in Archive Section 8047V, marked the completion in my daily processing log, and moved to the next report. 19 more certifications required review before the end of my shift. I worked through them methodically, my mind already cataloging what ration bars I would select from the commissary for my evening meal. The handprint lingered at the edge of my thoughts, an odd detail that didn't quite fit, but nothing that disrupted my routine. The second document arrived 2 days later. Form 9012 Alpha, Resource Assessment for Viridia Secundus, Post-Reclamation Analysis, Agricultural Output Projections, Mineral Reserves, Industrial Capacity, Labor Force Availability. I scanned through the expected categories, cross-referencing against the initial conquest reports. Agricultural output, down 73%, expected. Combat would have disrupted farming cycles. Mineral reserve is unchanged. Industrial capacity, reduced to 41% of pre-reclamation levels. Labor force availability, 6,412 individuals, all imported from neighboring sectors. I stopped. Read the number again. 6,412. I pulled up the census data from the original conquest reports. Viridia Secundus pre-reclamation population, 473,800,000. Post-reclamation population, per the compliance certification I had filed 2 days earlier, 473,900,000. A slight increase, attributed to Imperial settlers and administrative personnel. But the labor force assessment listed only 6,000 individuals, all imported. I checked the forms again. Different departments. Planetary Compliance Office versus Resource Management Bureau. Different personnel processing different aspects of the same world. I told myself there was an explanation. The labor force assessment dealt specifically with industrial workers. The population census dealt with total inhabitants. Perhaps the remaining 473 million were agricultural workers, not counted in industrial labor metrics. Perhaps they were still being processed through integration camps. Perhaps there was a data error, a transcription mistake, something mundane and correctable. I made a notation in my query log, flagging the discrepancy for clarification. Protocol dictated that statistical anomalies be resolved within 30 days. I submitted the query through official channels and continued my work. But the number stayed with me. 6,412. Where were the other 473 million people? I began pulling additional files. Not officially. Not as part of my standard processing duties. But during the final hours of my shift, when most colleagues had departed and the archives grew quiet except for the hum of cogitators and the distant rhythm of ventilation systems. I told myself I was being thorough. I told myself this was proper due diligence. I did not yet admit I was afraid of what I might find. The military annexes were restricted, but my clearance level granted access to summary reports. I located the Conquest Archive for Viridia Secundus, a thick file containing strategic assessments, casualty figures, and tactical analysis. I read through the commander's final report, dated 3 days after the world was declared reclaimed. Heretical resistance eliminated. Population centers secured. Compliance operations proceeding according to Departamento Munitorum guidelines. Estimated civilian casualties, 467,300,000. Imperial casualties, 74,600. Victory achieved with acceptable losses, 467 million civilian casualties. On a world of 473 million people, I sat in the cold archives, breath misting in the air, staring at the numbers. The math was simple, brutal. Nearly the entire planetary population had been killed during the reclamation. Only 6 million remained alive. But the compliance certification I had filed listed the population at 473 million. Someone had falsified the census. Someone had written down a population that no longer existed. I should have reported this immediately. I should have flagged it as critical fraud, escalated to Prefect Hollis, initiated a formal investigation. Instead, I closed the file. I returned to my quarters. I lay on my cot, staring at the steel ceiling, and tried to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Perhaps the casualty figure was inflated. Perhaps it included enemy combatants counted incorrectly. Perhaps the census was preliminary, conducted before full accounting. Perhaps. The next morning, I lit my devotional candle as always. I recited the litany of diligent service. The words felt hollow in my mouth, but I spoke them anyway because routine was what I had, and routine was what kept the questions at bay. I processed 14 reports that day. I found no more discrepancies. I told myself the Viridia Secundus anomaly was singular, an isolated error in a vast bureaucratic machinery that occasionally produced mistakes. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. The response to my query arrived 16 days later. A brief data burst from the Resource Management Bureau, logged and sealed with proper authorization codes. Statistical discrepancy resolved. Labor force figure reflected industrial workers only. Total population census accurate per compliance office records. Query closed. No explanation for how 6,000 industrial workers existed on a world where 467 million people had been killed. No explanation for where the other 466 million survivors were laboring, if not in industrial positions. Just a statement. A door closed. A question answered by refusing to acknowledge the question. I could have let it rest. I should have let it rest. But I returned to the archive that night, and I pulled the Viridia Secundus file again. And this time I read deeper. I found the purification protocols, the cleansing operations, the systematic processing of population centers marked for extreme sanction due to heretical contamination, irreversible exposure, spiritual compromise beyond redemption. I found the authorization forms, signed by an inquisitor whose name was redacted, approving total population sterilization with prejudice. I found the execution schedules broken down by district, by city, by town, by hamlet, methodical, efficient, complete, and I found the compliance certification draft, dated 1 week before the cleansing operations concluded, with a note in the margin. Census to reflect pre-reclamation population. Integration narrative to emphasize successful pacification and return to productivity. Actual casualty figures restricted to military annexes, access level obsidian, and above. They had decided to lie before the killing even finished. They had planned the false census, while the pyres still burned, and I had filed it. I had verified it. I had placed my own certification mark on a document that claimed 473 million people lived and worked in the Emperor's service, when in truth only 6,000 remained alive on a world of ash and unmarked graves. The handprint rust-colored, small fingers pressed against parchment. Not ink blood, a child's blood. Someone in the compliance office had prepared that certification while standing in the aftermath, and a child's hand had touched it. And no one had thought to clean it before sending it across the sector, because the child was dead and the blood didn't matter, because the blood was never supposed to be seen. It was filed away, buried in archives, a detail so minor that even if noticed it would be dismissed as contamination. Aesthetic only. Non-critical. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my workstation, the devotional candle extinguished, the brass aquila watching me with cold metal eyes, and I began pulling more files. Not just Viridia Secundus. Other worlds. Other reclamations. Other victories. Telesar IV. Population pre-reclamation 200 million. Casualty figures 197 million. Census post-reclamation 200 million. A perfect match. Except the labor force assessment listed only 4,000 imported workers and made no mention of local survivors. Guest prime. Population pre-reclamation 83 million. Casualty figures 79 million. Census post-reclamation 83 million. Labor force 1,200, all imported, Mordian's Gate. Population pre-reclamation 9 million. Casualty figures 8 million. 400,000. Census post-reclamation 9 million. 200,000. Slight increase attributed to Imperial settlers. Labor force 800, all imported. I pulled 47 reclamation files that night. 23 showed the same pattern. Casualty figures that approached total population death. Census reports that pretended no one had died. Labor assessments that revealed the truth the worlds were empty. The people were gone. The Imperium had killed them during reclamation, then falsified records to pretend the planets remained inhabited, productive, loyal. Not all of them. 24 showed reasonable casualties, surviving populations, genuine integration. But 23, nearly half. 23 worlds where Imperial victory meant extinction dressed in administrative lies. 23 worlds where my certification had affirmed a fiction. 23 worlds where I had been complicit in concealing mass death. I thought of the propaganda murals in the station's devotional chapel. Imperial Guard soldiers standing victoriously on reclaimed soil. Grateful citizens kneeling in renewed faith. The Emperor's light restored to fallen worlds. I had seen those murals 1,000 times. I had believed them. I had thought the suffering of reclamation was temporary, necessary, redemptive. I had not known that reclamation often meant replacement, that victory meant the victors were the only ones left alive. The archives were silent except for my breathing and the hum of machinery. I could hear my heart beating in my chest, too fast, too loud. My hands trembled as I closed the final file. I had verified these documents. I had placed my authority behind their accuracy. I had told the Administratum, and by extension the Imperium itself, that these worlds were compliant, functioning, inhabited. I had lied, or I had been made to lie, or I had chosen not to see the lie. The distinctions felt meaningless. I needed to understand why. Not why the killing happened. Combat produced casualties, heresy required cleansing. I understood the doctrine. But why the lies? Why falsify the census? Why pretend the dead still lived? What purpose did the deception serve? I began researching the subsequent years. What happened to these empty worlds after their false certifications were filed? Viridia Secundus had been reclaimed 4 years ago. I pulled the tithe records. Year 1 agricultural output 40% below projected levels. Explanation. Recovery period, normal post-conflict adjustment. Year 2 53% below projections. Explanation. Labor shortages being addressed. Year 3 61% below projections. Explanation. Infrastructural challenges ongoing. Year 4 72% below projections. No explanation offered. World that supposedly held 473 million people could not meet basic agricultural quotas because the people were dead, because 6,000 imported workers could not farm an entire planet, because the lie in the compliance certification created a cascade of subsequent lies. Each year's failure blamed on recovery delays or infrastructure or anything except the simple truth. There was no one there to do the work. But the tithes were still demanded. The quotas were still set. The Administratum projected needs based on census data that listed 473 million inhabitants. And when the world failed to deliver, sanctions were imposed. I found them in the fiscal records. Penalties for underperformance. Increased tithe obligations for the following year. Threats of governance restructuring. The Imperium was punishing a dead world for failing to produce like a living one. It would have been darkly absurd if it were not so completely horrifying. The machine of bureaucracy grinding forward, demanding crops from corpses, filing reports that scolded empty cities for insufficient output, projecting next year's quotas based on a population that existed only on parchment. I stood and walked to the viewport. Seeper Mundi curved below, its hive cities glowing like embers in the darkness. Billions of people down there, living and working, believing the Imperium's victories meant salvation that reclaimed world's return to prosperity and faith. I had believed that. 16 years of service, 16 years of processing certifications. And I had believed every word because the alternative was unthinkable. But now I had thought it, and I could not unthink it. The question that consumed me was not whether this was wrong. It was wrong. It was obviously, fundamentally, categorically wrong. The question was whether it was intentional, whether someone, somewhere in the vast hierarchy of imperial authority, had designed this system deliberately, or whether it was the accidental product of bureaucratic incompetence and departmental failures to communicate. Whether this was corruption or policy, I needed to know which, because if it was corruption, I could report it. If it was policy, then reporting it would accomplish nothing except my own execution. I returned to my quarters as dawn approached, though time meant little in the windowless corridors of the station. I did not eat. I did not sleep. I sat on my cot and stared at my hands, the same hands that had filed those certifications, that had verified the lies, that had never once questioned whether the numbers added up, because questioning was not my role. My role was to process, to verify proper format, proper signatures, proper authorization codes, not to investigate, not to challenge, not to think too deeply about what the forms meant in terms of human lives and human deaths. But I was thinking now, and I could not stop. I reported for duty at the beginning of third shift. Malins nodded at the security checkpoint. The archives were maintained at 15 degrees. My breath misted. I lit the devotional candle out of habit, but I did not recite the litany. I sat at my workstation, facing the viewport and the stars beyond, and I waited. Prefect Hollis arrived at mid-shift, unusual for him. He crossed the archives directly to my station, his footsteps echoing on the steel floor. He was a broad man. His administratum robes stretched across a frame that suggested he had once served in the Astra Militarum, before transitioning to bureaucratic service. His face was weathered, scarred along the left cheek, eyes that had seen things I suspected I was only beginning to understand. "Evaluator Calvaris," he said. His voice was tired. "I need to speak with you, privately." We walked to a small conference chamber off the main archives, a windowless room with a single table and 2 chairs. The door sealed behind us with a hiss of pressurization. Hollis sat heavily, gestured for me to do the same. "You have been accessing restricted files," he said. Not a question, a statement. I did not deny it. I found discrepancies in the Viridia Secundus compliance certification. I was attempting to resolve them, be pulling 47 reclamation files and cross-referencing casualty figures against census data and labor assessments. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "That goes beyond resolving a discrepancy, Calvaris. That is conducting an investigation. Is the data incorrect?" I asked. My voice was steadier than I felt. "Are the casualty figures wrong? Are the census reports accurate?" Hollis closed his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he opened them again, something in his expression had shifted. Not anger, wariness, deep bone-level exhaustion. "No," he said quietly. "The data is accurate. Both sets of data. The casualty figures reflect what happened during reclamation. The census reports reflect what we need to believe happened." There it was. Confirmation. Not corruption. Not error. Policy. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. Hollis stood and walked to the wall, resting one hand against the cold metal. His shoulders were tense. How long have you served the Administratum, Calvaris? 16 years. I have served for 43. 4 decades of processing reports, verifying certifications, maintaining the records that allow the Imperium to function. Do you know what I have learned in those 4 decades? He turned to face me. The Imperium runs on lies, not deception. Lies. There is a difference. Deception is when you tell a falsehood hoping no one discovers the truth. A lie is when you tell a falsehood and everyone with sufficient access knows it is false, but we all agree to pretend it is true because the truth is unworkable. 467 million people were killed on Viridia Secundus, I said. My voice was shaking now. That is not unworkable truth. That is atrocity. Yes, Hollis said simply. It is. And if we recorded it accurately, what would follow? The Departamento Munitorum would have to justify why an agricultural world with minimal heretical presence required 99% population elimination. Questions would be raised. Inquiries would be launched. Commanders would be censured. Inquisitors would be challenged. And most critically, other sectors would notice. They would ask whether their own reclamations were proportionate, whether the killing was truly necessary, whether the Imperium's victories were worth their cost. They should ask those questions, I said. Should they? Hollis returned to his chair, sitting slowly, like a man carrying immense weight. Tell me, Calvaris, what do you think holds the Imperium together? Faith, doctrine, the Emperor's divine will. Yes, no, fear, certainty. The unshakable belief that the Imperium is vast, powerful, and always victorious. That heresy is always crushed. That rebellion is always punished. That compliance is always rewarded. The moment that certainty fractures, the moment populations begin to believe the Imperium is fallible, that its victories are pyrrhic, that its justice is arbitrary, the entire structure begins to collapse. We cannot afford doubt. We cannot afford questions. We cannot afford the truth. He pulled a data slate from his robes and placed it on the table between us. This is a classified Administratum protocol, authorization level obsidian. You do not have clearance to view it, but I am showing it to you anyway because you have already discovered what it contains. He activated the slate. Text appeared, dense and bureaucratic. Census Standardization Protocol, subsection 73. In cases where reclamation operations result in population reduction exceeding 75%, official census records shall reflect pre-reclamation population levels with nominal adjustment for natural growth. Purpose: to maintain tithe projection accuracy, prevent administrative disruption, and preserve strategic intelligence security. I read it twice. The language was dry, technical, utterly mundane. It described genocide as population reduction. It mandated lies as census standardization. It treated the mass death of billions across the Imperium as an administrative inconvenience requiring standardized paperwork solutions. This is not some corrupt official falsifying reports, Hollis said. This is Administratum policy, approved at the segmentum level, implemented sector-wide. Every senior compliance officer knows. Every prefect, every Lord Administrator. We all know the census reports are fiction. We file them anyway because the alternative is acknowledging that imperial reclamation often means imperial extermination, and that acknowledgement would undermine the entire edifice of faith and fear that keeps a million worlds from rebellion. How many? I asked. How many worlds? I do not have exact figures. The data is compartmentalized, but based on 43 years of processing, thousands. Across the Imperium, over centuries, thousands of worlds where victory meant the victors inherited ash and called it glory. I thought about the propaganda murals again, the grateful citizens kneeling, the restored light, the triumph of reclamation. All of it fiction. All of it lies built on corpses. Why are you telling me this? I asked. You could have simply reprimanded me for unauthorized access, reassigned me, memory wiped me if necessary. Why explain? Hollis was quiet for a long moment. His hands rested on the table, and I noticed they trembled slightly, a fine tremor he could not quite suppress. Because I am tired, he said finally. Because I have filed these reports for 4 decades, and I have never once been able to tell another human being what I know. Because you discovered it on your own, and you deserve to understand what you have found. He looked at me directly, and his eyes were hollow. And because I do not know if what we are doing is right. I have not known for 43 years. But someone must be willing to maintain the system, and I have chosen to be that someone. And I will carry that weight until I die. You are asking me to do the same? I said. I am telling you that you have a choice. You can report this through official channels. You will be detained, interrogated, and most likely executed for knowing what you are not cleared to know. Or you can accept what you have learned, continue your work, and live with the weight as I have. There is no third option. There is no reform. There is no justice. There is only the system, and your choice whether to serve it or die opposing it. The conference chamber was utterly silent. I could hear the ventilation system, a low susurrus of recycled air. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear Hollis's breath, labored and heavy. The handprint on the Viridia Secundus certification, I said. A child's blood. Yes. How old? The notes indicate she was 9. Her mother had worked in the compliance office before the reclamation. Both were executed for failing to denounce heretical elements in their district, despite no evidence they had knowledge of such elements. The child touched the certification as it was being prepared. No one cleaned it. It did not matter. She was already dead. I stood. My legs were unsteady. I walked to the door, placed my hand on the seal release, then stopped. You said I have a choice between service and death, but there is a third option. I could refuse to process the false reports. I could mark them as discrepant. I could inject truth into the lies. Hollis shook his head. Then you are simply removed, and another evaluator processes them instead. The reports are filed regardless. You accomplish nothing except your own suffering. So all choices lead to the same result. The lies continue. The dead are erased. The Imperium declares victory, and no one counts the cost, Hollis said. He stood as well, slowly, painfully. That is the nature of the machine we serve. It is too vast to stop, too entrenched to reform. We can participate, or we can die. Those are the only true choices. I opened the door. I walked back to my workstation. The devotional candle had burned down to a stub. The brass Aquila watched me. I sat in my chair and stared at the viewport, at Cipra Mundi and its billions of inhabitants who believed the lies because believing was easier than knowing. I processed 32 reports that day. 14 were routine, unremarkable. 18 were from recently reclaimed worlds. I cross-referenced them against military annexes. 11 showed the pattern. Total population death, false census, the pretense of victory disguising annihilation. I certified every one of them. I placed my authority seal on each document. I filed them in their proper archive sections. I logged completion in my daily processing record, and I hated myself. For 3 weeks, I continued working. I processed reports. I certified lies. I went through the motions of my duty, while the knowledge ate at me from the inside. I stopped lighting the devotional candle. I stopped reciting the litany. I stopped pretending that what I did mattered in any way, except as a cog in a vast machine built to conceal atrocity. I began keeping personal records, not official, hidden. Each night, I would return to my quarters and write down the names. Viridia Secundus, Talasser IV, Guest Prime, Mordian's Gate. 23 names when I started, 37 by the end of the first week, 52 by the end of the third. Each one a world. Each one millions of dead. Each one a lie I had certified. I do not know what I thought the list would accomplish. I could not report it. I could not publish it. I could not even tell anyone without condemning myself. But I wrote it anyway, because someone needed to remember. Someone needed to maintain an accounting that the official records would never show. On the 37th day, after my conversation with Hollis, a new report arrived. Form 8847 Purges, planetary compliance certification. The world was Salvine IV, a mining colony in the Corinth Belt. Population pre-reclamation, 12 million. I pulled the military annexes. Casualty figures 11,800,000. The census report claimed 12,300,000 inhabitants, noting successful integration and population growth post-reclamation. I sat at my workstation, the report before me, and I could not move. My hands rested on the desk, motionless. The certification required only my seal, a gesture, a formality, the work of seconds, and I could not do it, because Salvine IV was where my sister had lived, Elira, 23 years old. She had emigrated to Salvine IV 8 years prior, seeking work in the mining administration. We had exchanged occasional correspondence, though communication across subsectors was slow and irregular. The last message I had received from her was dated 2 years ago. She had written about her promotion to shift supervisor, about the child she was carrying, about her hope that I might visit someday. I pulled the casualty annexes, searched the listed dead. Civilian casualties were not recorded by name, only by district and processing center. Elira would have been in District 7, near the primary mine complex. District 7, 400,000 inhabitants. Casualties 397,000. Processing method mass execution. Heretical contamination suspected but unproven. Total sanction authorized under Inquisitorial mandate. My sister was dead. Her child was dead. 400,000 people were dead in her district alone. 11,800,000 across the world. And the report before me claimed they still lived. I do not remember making the decision. I remember my hands moving. I remember pulling an authorization stamp from my workstation drawer. I remember pressing it to the certification where it would officially mark the document as discrepant, flagged for investigation, rejected for filing. I remember Prefect Hollis appearing at my shoulder. I had not heard him approach. He looked at the stamped certification, at the rejection mark I had placed, and his expression was infinitely sad. "Calvaris," he said quietly, "do not do this." "She was my sister," I said. My voice did not sound like my own. "I know. I reviewed your personnel file after our conversation. I knew this report would arrive eventually. I hoped you would be strong enough to process it, strong enough to lie about my sister's death, to certify that she lives when she is ash." I stood, facing him. "I cannot. I will not." "Then you have chosen," Hollis said. He activated his Vox grill. "Security, this is Prefect Hollis. I need an escort to Archives Processing Wing Secundus. Priority Obsidian. Bring containment protocols." I should have felt fear. I felt only emptiness. The guards arrived within 3 minutes. Arbitrators in black carapace armor, faces hidden behind helmets, shock mauls at their belts. They flanked me without speaking. "Evaluator Theron Calvaris," Hollis said formally. "You are detained for processing classified information beyond your authorization level and for willful disruption of administratum protocols. You will be transferred to interrogation for assessment of security compromise." He paused.
"I am sorry."
"Are you?" I asked. He did not answer. The guards seized my arms. They walked me from the archives, down corridor 73, past the security checkpoint where Malins watched without expression. They took me to a detention level I had never known existed, deep in the station's core, where the temperature was cold enough that ice formed on the walls and my breath came in clouds. The interrogation lasted 3 days. Not torture, precisely. Questions, assessments, verification of what I knew and who I had told. Compliance officers in gray robes asking the same inquiries in different variations, mapping the extent of my knowledge, determining whether I was a security risk or simply an ideological problem. On the 4th day, Inquisitor Valen arrived. I knew what he was before he spoke. the inquisitorial rosette at his collar, the way the compliance officers deferred to him, the cold, analytical way he studied me, like I was a specimen for dissection. He dismissed the others. We sat alone in the interrogation chamber. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 40 standard years, with augmetic eyes that whirred and clicked when they focused. His hands were bare, unaugmented, the nails trimmed precisely. He wore the inquisitorial uniform without adornment, black fabric without insignia beyond the rosette. "Evaluator Calvaris," he said. His voice was level, neutral, containing neither cruelty nor compassion. "You understand what you have discovered?"
Yes.
"You understand why the census standardization protocol exists?" "I understand the rationalization." "Not rationalization, necessity." He leaned forward slightly. "The Imperium survives because it maintains the illusion of strength. Not actual strength, illusion, perception, belief. The moment that illusion fractures, rebellion follows. Not in one system, in thousands. Billions die in civil war. Chaos consumes entire sectors. The alternative to lies is extinction. The alternative to lies is truth," I said. "No, the alternative to lies is collapse. Truth is a luxury we cannot afford." He activated a data slate, pulled up files, turned it so I could see. "I have reviewed 47 reclamation operations in the past 10 years. 23 required population sterilization, exceeding 75%. All 23 were justified by immediate threat assessment, chaos cults, genestealer infiltration, orc occupation, Necron awakening. In every case, attempting to sort heretical from loyal was deemed impossible within operational timeframes. Cleansing entire populations was determined to be more efficient than surgical extraction of corruption." "Efficient," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "You murdered billions because it was efficient." "I murdered no one. I authorized commanders to make battlefield decisions with incomplete information under time pressure. Some chose total sanction. Some chose selective purge. The ones who chose selective purge often faced secondary outbreaks, requiring additional operations, additional casualties, additional resource expenditure. The ones who chose total sanction eliminated threats permanently. Which approach saves more lives across centuries? You are asking me to calculate whether genocide today prevents theoretical genocide tomorrow. Yes, he said it, without hesitation, without shame. That is precisely what I am asking you to calculate. Because that is the calculation I make every day. That is the calculation every inquisitor, every lord commander, every planetary governor must make. We choose between small horrors and large horrors. We choose the smaller one. We live with the weight. We do not have the luxury of choosing neither. I stared at him. His augmetic eyes clicked and focused, refocused, analyzing my expression with mechanical precision. You believe what you are saying, I said slowly. You genuinely believe this is necessary. I do not know if it is necessary, Valen said. His voice dropped, something almost human entering it. I have not known for decades, but I know what happens when we do not act. I have seen worlds fall to chaos because we hesitated, because we tried to save the innocent, because we believed we could sort corruption from faith. I have watched billions die slowly, in agony, their souls consumed by entities that should not exist, and I have asked myself which death is mercy, quick execution or slow damnation. I choose quick execution. I sign the warrants. I authorize the purges, and I lie awake wondering if I am a monster or a pragmatist, or whether there is any meaningful difference. He deactivated the data slate. His hands rested on the table, and I saw they trembled slightly, same as Hollis's had. The tremor of someone carrying weight for too long. Your sister was named Alira, he said quietly. She worked as a shift supervisor in District 7. She had a daughter, 3 months old when the reclamation began. They were processed on the 4th day of operations, along with 397,000 others from their district. The heretical contamination in District 7 was assessed at 12% population penetration. Attempting to isolate the 12% would have required 6 months of investigation. 6 months for the contamination to spread, 6 months of risk. I authorized total sanction. Your sister died because I signed a form. Your niece died because I chose efficiency over precision. The interrogation chamber was silent. I could hear the ice crackling on the walls. I could hear my own heartbeat, too loud in my ears. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you deserve to know who killed your family. Not some abstract system. Not some faceless bureaucracy. Me, Inquisitor Edric Valen, Ordo Hereticus. I reviewed the evidence. I made the assessment. I signed the authorization. Your sister's blood is on my hands specifically, personally, and I accept that responsibility. He leaned back in his chair. And because I want you to understand that I am not a sadist. I am not corrupt. I am not ignorant of the cost. I simply believe the alternative cost is higher, and someone must be willing to pay in blood to prevent payment in souls. You want me to forgive you? I said. No. I want you to comprehend the choice you face. You can reject what I have done, maintain your moral purity. Refuse to be complicit in the system. You will be executed for security purposes. Your death will change nothing. The protocols will continue. The purges will continue. The lies will continue. Or you can accept that the Imperium is built on necessary evil, return to your work, process the certifications, and live knowing you are part of something monstrous that may be the only thing preventing something worse. Those are not choices. Those are different flavors of damnation. Yes, Valen said simply. Welcome to Imperial service. We are all damned. The only question is whether our damnation serves a purpose. He stood, walked to the door, paused with his hand on the seal release. I do not enjoy this conversation, evaluator. I have had variations of it 17 times in my career. Subordinates who discover the truth, who cannot reconcile duty with conscience. Most choose death. 3 chose service. I respect both decisions, but I need to know which you choose. What happens if I choose service? I asked. I return to my workstation. I certify the lies. I spend the rest of my life as an accomplice to genocide. What does that make me? Alive, functional, complicit. Valen turned to face me fully, and perhaps, in quiet moments, someone who remembers the names. Someone who maintains an accounting even if it never becomes public. Someone who preserves the truth in darkness, so that if circumstances ever change, if the Imperium ever reaches a point where it can afford honesty, the record exists. You know about my list. Of course. We monitor everything. Your hidden records of falsified census reports. The names of dead worlds. The tally of lies you have certified. His augmetic eyes clicked. I have not deleted them. I have not reported them. Because I maintain a similar record. 17,000 authorizations across 4 decades. 17,000 worlds where I chose the smaller horror. I write them down. I remember them. And I tell myself that someday, someone will need to account for what we have done. And when that day comes, I want the accounting to be accurate. He opened the door. You have until dawn to decide. Choose service, and you return to your duties with full knowledge of what you are doing and why. Choose death, and it will be quick, clean, recorded as an administrative accident. Either way, the machine continues. The door sealed behind him. I sat alone in the cold interrogation chamber, breath misting, and tried to understand what I felt. Not anger anymore, not grief, something deeper and more corrosive. The understanding that there were no good choices, only different degrees of complicity and different costs for maintaining conscience. I thought about my sister, Alira, 23 years old, dead for 2 years while I processed reports and believed the Imperium's victories meant something noble. I thought about her daughter, my niece, whose name I had never learned because the message announcing her birth had been lost in transit. 3 months old, executed for efficiency, for the greater good, for the preservation of a system that consumed its own people and called it salvation. I thought about the 23 worlds I had already certified as lies. The millions dead on Viridia Secundus, Talasar Avi, Guest Prime. The 52 worlds in my hidden list. The hundreds more I would certify if I chose service. The thousands Valen had authorized. The tens of thousands across the Imperium, across centuries, across the vast grinding machinery of a regime that survived by devouring itself. And I thought about the alternative. Death, clean and quick. Escape from complicity. Preservation of conscience. The moral satisfaction of refusing to participate in atrocity. But changing nothing. Accomplishing nothing. The reports would be processed by someone else. The lies would continue. The dead would remain forgotten. My execution would be a gesture, noble perhaps, but ultimately futile. I had 16 hours until dawn. I spent them thinking. Not about the large philosophical questions, though those haunted me, but about the small, specific, human questions. What would my life look like if I chose service? Would I be able to meet my own eyes in the mirror? Would I be able to speak with colleagues, knowing what we collectively maintained? Would I find some way to justify it to myself? Some rationalization that let me sleep? Or would I join Hollis and Valen in their exhausted wakefulness, hands trembling, carrying weight until it crushed me? And if I chose death, would it mean anything? Would anyone remember that I refused? Would my name appear in any record as a man who chose conscience over survival? Or would I simply disappear, logged as an accident, erased as thoroughly as the populations I had certified as dead? The answer, I realized, was that neither choice offered redemption. Neither choice offered victory. Both offered only different forms of defeat, different ways of being broken by a system too vast to fight and too entrenched to reform. Dawn approached. I made my decision not because it was right, but because it was the only decision I could live with, which is to say the only decision I could die for. When Inquisitor Valen returned, I told him, "I choose death," I said. "I will not certify another lie. I will not be complicit in another genocide. I understand it changes nothing. I understand someone else will process the reports. But I will not be that someone. Not anymore. Not ever again." Valen studied me for a long moment. His augmetic eyes whirred softly. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate. "I respect that choice," he said. "For what small comfort it offers, I do not think you are wrong. You are simply choosing a different form of integrity than I chose." "Will you remember me?" I asked. "Add me to your tally?" 17,000 worlds and one compliance officer who refused. "Yes, I will remember." He activated his Vox grill. "Prepare execution protocol. Evaluator Theron Calvaris, compliance breach. Termination authorized." He looked at me again. "Is there anything you wish recorded? Any testimony you wish preserved?" "Just the truth," I said. "That the Imperium's victories are built on the corpses of the people it claims to save. That we murdered billions and called it reclamation. That the census reports are lies and the compliance certifications are fraud, and everyone with sufficient clearance knows and perpetuates the deception anyway. That the machine is designed to kill, and we are all complicit, whether we process the forms or sign the authorizations or simply believe the propaganda, because questioning is too dangerous. That testimony will be classified at the highest levels," Valen said. "It will be read by perhaps 3 people across the sector. It will change nothing, I know. Recorded anyway, they took me to an execution chamber. Small, efficient. A chair with restraints. A bolt pistol mounted on a mechanical arm calibrated for precise placement and instant death. The arbitrators strapped me in without ceremony. Valen stood near the doorway, watching. "Do you wish final rites?" he asked. "No. The God Emperor and I have nothing left to say to each other." "Then I will make it quick." He activated the execution mechanism. The bolt pistol's machine spirit initialized with a soft chime. "Any final words?" I thought about that. What could I say that mattered? What could I leave behind that would endure? The answer was nothing. My words would be classified, buried, forgotten. My death would be recorded as an accident. My name would disappear from all records except whatever private Tali Valen maintained. But I would say them anyway, because they were true, and someone needed to speak truth, even if no one would ever hear it. The Imperium declares victory, I said, but victory requires victors and defeated. On 23 worlds I certified, there were only victors. Everyone else was dead. That is not victory. That is extermination dressed in ceremonial language and filed in triplicate. Tell whoever reads this testimony that the Emperor's light burned those worlds to ash, and we lied about it, and we will lie about it again, and again, and again, because the machine requires lies to function, and we have all chosen to be part of the machine. Valen said nothing. The bolt pistol adjusted its angle slightly, targeting calibrated. The mechanized systems of execution demonstrating more precision than the systems of imperial justice ever had. For what it matters. Valen said quietly, I do not think you are wrong. I think you are refusing to make the choice I made, and I cannot fault you for that. May you find whatever peace exists beyond this. There is no peace, I said, only different forms of war. But at least I will die as myself. The bolt pistol fired. The round entered my skull at the precise angle to destroy consciousness instantly, to end thought before pain could register, to terminate existence with bureaucratic efficiency. I did not feel it. I did not feel anything. There was awareness, and then there was nothing. I am dead now. I have been dead for 17 months. Though time has lost meaning in whatever place the dead go, if the dead go anywhere at all. My body was incinerated according to protocol. My ashes vented into space. My workstation reassigned to another evaluator who processes the same reports I once processed and certifies the same lies I once certified. The machine continues. The purges continue. The false census reports continue. My death changed nothing, accomplished nothing, mattered to no one except perhaps Inquisitor Valen, who added my name to his tally and carries my weight along with the weight of 17,000 worlds. But if you are reading this, if somehow this classified testimony escaped the archives and reached someone with eyes to see it, then perhaps my death accomplished something after all. Perhaps you now know what I learned too late. That imperial victory is measured not in worlds saved but in populations erased. That reclamation means replacement. That the census reports claiming 400 million inhabitants on a world where 400 million were executed are lies. Maintained deliberately, filed systematically, certified by people like me who believed or who knew but chose service over death. I do not know if what Inquisitor Valen believed was true. I do not know if the small horrors prevent the large ones. If the purges are necessary evils or simply evils that we have convinced ourselves are necessary because the alternative is confronting what we have become. I do not know if the Imperium is humanity's only hope for survival or humanity's slow method of suicide, killing itself one reclaimed world at a time while claiming each death brings it closer to salvation. What I know is this. I certified 23 false compliance reports before I understood what they meant. 23 worlds where the population was dead and the census claimed they lived. I was complicit in concealing genocide. I was part of the machine. And when I finally understood what I was part of, I chose to die rather than continue. Not because my death mattered, but because continuing would have required me to become someone I could not bear to be. The handprint on the Viridia Secundus certification haunts me still, though I no longer have a body to feel haunted, no longer have hands that shake or eyes that see. A child's blood, rust-colored, pressed against parchment in the moment before or after her execution. She was 9 years old. She died for efficiency. Her death was filed, logged, archived, and forgotten by everyone except perhaps her mother, who died beside her, and me, who saw the evidence of her existence and could not unsee it. There were millions like her, across Viridia Secundus, across Talassar V, across Guest Prime and Salvine IV, and the 52 worlds in my hidden records, and the thousands more across the Imperium that I never discovered. Children executed for contamination they did not carry. Families burned for heresies they did not commit. Populations sterilized because sorting the guilty from the innocent was deemed too time-consuming, too expensive, too inconvenient for a regime that measured success in tithe quotas and threat elimination rather than lives preserved or souls saved. This is what happens after the Imperium declares victory. The propaganda murals show grateful citizens kneeling in renewed faith. The official reports claim successful integration and population growth. The truth is that the battlefields are graveyards, the reclaimed cities are empty, and the survivors are few enough to be imported from other worlds because everyone who lived there before is dead. The truth is that imperial victory often means there is nothing left to rule except ashes and lies. And we call that triumph, because acknowledging the cost would fracture the illusion of strength that holds a million worlds in obedience through fear. I do not ask you to take action if you read this. I do not ask you to rebel or resist or attempt reform. Valen was right about that much. The machine is too vast to fight, too entrenched to change, and individual resistance accomplishes nothing except individual death. I ask only that you know, that you understand what imperial victory means in the specific, human, granular sense rather than the abstract, doctrinal, propagandistic sense. That you count the cost in children's handprints and sisters burned alive and millions dead for efficiency rather than in strategic objectives achieved and heretical threats eliminated and worlds returned to compliance. I ask that you remember Viridia Secundus. Population 473 million. Casualties 467 million. Census report 473 million. Labor force 6,000 imported. The numbers do not match because the numbers are not meant to match. The lie is the policy. The deception is the protocol. And everyone with sufficient clearance knows and perpetuates it, and lives with the weight or dies refusing to carry it. I chose death. Hollis chose service. Valen chose to be the one willing to sign the authorizations. None of us chose correctly because there was no correct choice. Only different forms of damnation, different ways of breaking under a system that breaks everyone it touches. The only question that matters is which breaking you can survive and which breaking destroys what you believe makes you human. For me, that breaking point was my sister, Elira, 23 years old, executed for contamination she did not have. Her daughter, 3 months old, whose name I never learned, executed alongside her. 397,000 others in District 7. 11,800,000 across Salvine IV. All of them dead, while I processed reports in a climate-controlled archive and believed my work mattered, believed the certifications I filed reflected truth, believed the Imperium's victories meant what the propaganda claimed they meant. I was naive. I was complicit. I was broken by the truth when it finally reached me. And I am dead now. Testimony recorded and classified and buried where it cannot harm the machine that killed me. And I am speaking to you from beyond that death with the only message that matters. They lied. About Viridia Secundus. About Talassar V. About Salvine IV and all the others. About what victory costs and who pays the price and what remains when the Imperium declares a world reclaimed. The cost is total. The price is paid in blood and ash. And what remains is emptiness dressed in bureaucratic language, filed in archives, certified by people who know the truth but cannot afford to speak it. I spoke it. I died for it. And you who read this testimony are the only evidence that my death meant anything at all, that my refusal to certify another lie accomplished anything except my own execution. Remember the names. Remember the numbers. Remember that imperial victory is built on corpses, and the corpses are ours, and the machine continues grinding forward, and we are all complicit in ways large and small unless we choose to stop. I stopped. It cost me everything. It changed nothing, But I stopped. My name is Theron Calvaris. I was Senior Compliance Evaluator, 3rd Class, Subsector Administratum, Segmentum Obscurus. I served the Emperor faithfully for 16 years. I believed in the Imperium's righteousness. I believed in the necessity of its victories. I believed the lies because the truth was unthinkable. And when I finally thought the unthinkable, when I counted the dead and measured them against the living and understood what the Imperium's victories truly meant, I chose conscience over survival, truth over service, death over complicity. I do not know if that makes me a hero or a fool. I suspect it makes me neither. Just another name in a tally of broken people who discovered too much and paid the price for knowing. But I am dead now, and testimony is all I have left, and I am giving it to you freely and completely. The Imperium's victories are nightmares dressed as triumph, and we maintain the nightmare through lies. And someone must be willing to speak truth, even if truth changes nothing. I have spoken. I am dead. The machine continues without me. The purges continue. The lies continue. The worlds burn and the census reports claim they prosper, and the compliance office certifies it all with proper authorization codes and precise filing procedures, and no one questions because questioning is death. But you know now, you who read this, you know what victory costs. You know what happens after the Imperium declares triumph. You know that the grateful citizens in the propaganda murals are fictional, that the restored worlds are graveyards, that the population figures are lies, and the compliance certifications are fraud, and the entire edifice of imperial righteousness is built on concealment of atrocity so vast that acknowledging it would shatter the faith that holds the Imperium together. I do not tell you this to inspire rebellion. I tell you this because truth has value even when truth is powerless, because knowing matters even when knowing changes nothing, because someone must maintain an accounting of what we have done and what we continue to do in the Emperor's name. I maintained that accounting. 52 worlds, millions dead, lies certified. And when I could no longer certify the lies, I died. Cleanly, quickly, efficiently. Just like the populations we purged, just like the victories we declared, just like the machine that grinds forward over corpses and calls it progress. This is my testimony. This is my accounting. This is what I learned when I stopped believing the lies that the Imperium survives by consuming itself, one world at a time, one population at a time, one soul at a time. That victory is measured not in what we save, but in what we are willing to destroy. That compliance is maintained through fear, built on lies, built on graves, built on silence. I broke the silence. It killed me. The silence continues without me, vast and impenetrable, and maintained by 10,000 compliance officers processing 10,000 false reports, and never once questioning whether the numbers match, because questioning is death and complicity is survival, and the only real choice is which form of damnation you can carry. I could not carry it. I died rather than carry it. And if you who read this can carry it, can process the reports and certify the lies and live with the weight, then I do not judge you. Hollis carried it for 43 years. Valen carries it still. The machine requires carriers, and someone must be willing to be broken by the load. And perhaps you are stronger than I was. Perhaps you can find some way to survive the knowledge and continue the work and justify it to yourself when you lie awake with trembling hands. But if you cannot carry it, if the weight is too much, if you reach the point where processing another false report would require you to become someone you cannot bear to be, then perhaps you will remember my name. Theron Calvaris, Compliance Officer, 16 years of service, dead for speaking truth. Changed nothing, mattered to no one, but chose to die as himself rather than live as what the system required. The choice was mine. The consequences were mine. The testimony is mine, and if it reaches you, if somehow these classified words escape the archives where they were meant to be buried, then perhaps my death accomplished something after all. Perhaps you now know what I died knowing. That Imperial victory is a lie built on lies built on corpses, and the corpses are countless, and the lies are endless, and the only truth left is that we are all complicit unless we choose to stop. I chose to stop. The stopping killed me. The machine continues. But I am dead as myself, testimony given, accounting maintained, truth spoken even if truth is powerless. And that will have to be enough, because nothing else is possible. Because the machine is too vast, and we are too small, and the only choice that matters is whether we participate in the grinding or die resisting it. I died resisting. My name was Theron Calvarus. I certified lies until I understood they were lies. Then I refused to certify another. Then I died. The handprint on the Viridia Secundus certification still haunts me in whatever place the dead go. If the dead go anywhere at all, a child's blood, rust-colored, small fingers, evidence of existence in the moment before erasure. I saw it. I remembered it. And I could not unsee it, could not forget it, could not continue pretending it did not matter. It mattered. She mattered. All 467 million dead on Viridia Secundus mattered. All 11,800,000 dead on Salvine IV mattered. My sister mattered. Her daughter mattered. Every single life erased for efficiency, for convenience, for the preservation of a system that survives by devouring itself. They all mattered even though they are all dead and all forgotten and all buried under false census reports that claim they never died at all. This is my testimony. This is my truth. This is what remains when the Imperium declares victory. Empty worlds, false reports, complicit officers, and the silence of the dead who cannot speak for themselves. I speak for them now. I speak from death. I speak knowing my words will be buried alongside my ashes, knowing testimony accomplishes nothing except testimony itself, knowing that the machine continues regardless. But I speak anyway, because someone must, because the truth has value even powerless, because I am Theron Calvarus, and I was broken by what I learned, and I chose death over complicity. And if you who read this remember nothing else, remember this: the Imperium's victories are built on the corpses of the innocent, and we certified it, and we filed it, and we called it holy, and we were wrong. We were all wrong. And I am dead now for saying so, and the lies continue. And that is what really happens after the Imperium declares victory. The end. The testimony complete. The machine grinding forward. The dead forgotten. The lies maintained. And one more name added to the tally of those who knew too much and died for knowing. Theron Calvarus. Compliance officer. 16 years faithful service. Final act of defiance. Changed nothing. Mattered to no one. But died as himself. That will have to be enough.